So Brenda is going to talk this morning about the McLellan house, which I thought was the one by the library, but
Yeah,
it is
so
not.
doesn't everybody.
And she's going to tell
That's the
us.
Sampson house. It became the McLellan house when David Cole didn't ask for information and decided it was the McLellan house that he'd heard so much about. And it's been the McLellan house ever since, but it's really the Sampson house.
Oh, well, so without further ado, please welcome the immensely intelligent
Watch it.
knower of all good things Gorham, Brenda Caldwell.
Knower of Gorham, yes.
Hit it, Brenda.
This is a paper that I did for the Cosmopolitan Club. It was amazing to me how many people did not know. How many people here know where the McLellan house, the original McLellan house, is located? Yeah, I'm sure you do. Okay, well, I'm going to tell you. You want me to speak up a little bit? I can do that. I was the town clerk in Gorham, and Ralph Newell took me to the council chambers, sat me up front, went to the back, and said, okay, now start talking. It was the one time in my life I was speechless. So if you can't hear me back there, just holler. There is more history on the USM campus than most people realize. In 1965, the university purchased a house built in 1773. That house has been in the same family since the time of completion, or had been at that time. The university paid, are you ready for this, $20,000 at the time, and then spent another $47,000 for renovations, including adding an L, which is not part of the original, to the back and redoing the complete inside. They did preserve the old brickwork, the original staircase, one of the original windows, and that's very interesting, on the second floor in the back, as well as the front steps, which were removed and stored in the cellar of the building. I don't have a picture of the front steps, they still exist, but please remember, this house was built in 1773. The cellar was dug in 1773. It's still a dirt cellar. I did not feel that I needed to make a picture of the stairs. They're just front stairs. Okay, the story, and let me pass this around. This is it's not a current picture. It was before, I think it was about the time that the university purchased it from the family. The L is not on this picture, but I thought it was a better picture than what I had, and I'll pass it around. It probably dates back to the early 60s. The story of the family and the house begins in Antrim County in Northern Ireland, where there existed a colony of Scottish immigrants. It was here in 1729 that Hugh McLellan, son of Hugh, and Elizabeth McLellan, daughter of Carey, married. Both were descended from Sir Hugh McLellan of Argyll, Scotland, who had been knighted in 1515. This family, part of the Scots-Irish group, and if anybody does genealogy, or there was a group of Scottish people that got driven out of Scotland into Ireland, and driven out of Ireland to England, and driven out of England back to Scotland, and then they ended up, most of them in the United States, and they settled mostly in Massachusetts and down south. Some of the people down south in Louisiana and like that, in the Bayou area, are descended from these Scotch-Irish people. This family, part of the Scotch-Irish group, migrated from Scotland to the north of Ireland some 100 years prior to their coming of our family to America. Since Sir Hugh McLellan, the two branches of the family had parted and gone their separate ways. Elizabeth's family was very wealthy, and when she was orphaned early in life, she was taken in by her uncle, who was a nobleman. Hugh's family had become peasants. When Elizabeth married Hugh, she married him out of love because her family forsook her. She was marrying below her station in life, and her uncle ostracized her a bit. And it created quite a family problem. It was a fairly small group of Scotch-Irish, and they were divided, and this divided them even more. This family problem added to the religious persecution that was happening in Ireland, as well as the famine in Ireland that happened at the same time. That caused Elizabeth and Hugh, along with their first son, William, to emigrate to America in 1733. The trip from Londonderry to Boston aboard the Eagle took about 2 months and was a rough and stormy voyage. During the trip, the second child was born to them but died in infancy. Can you imagine giving birth on a little ship? Anyway, from Boston, the family went to York, Maine, and then to Wells, Maine, where they purchased land and tried their hand at farming. That failed due to a poor crop. In Wells, another child was born and baptized, Carey, on November 3rd, 1734. This child also died in infancy. So of 3 children, they have 1 left. From Wells, the family moved to Saco, where Hugh's brother James lived. They remained in Saco only a short time before moving to Falmouth, which is now Portland. Falmouth is still Falmouth, but it encompassed Portland, Falmouth, Cape Elizabeth. Hugh had a sister living in Back Cove. Fearing the Indians might attack, the family again moved, this time to Falmouth Neck, which I believe is Cape Elizabeth now. While they were living in the Neck, Hugh paid his last cent, £10, for a grantee's right of land in Narragansett No. 7, which was to become Gorham, Maine. I searched everywhere to find out what £10 in 1778 would be worth now. And there's not a bank out there, including banks in Portland, that would even give me an estimate. So I have no idea what that would transfer to now. But that was the money they had. That was it. The deed was given by Shubal Gorham on August 10th, 1739. It was 200 acres, and listen to where it was located. Remember, they paid £10, whatever that was. It wasn't very much. It was located on what is now Fort Hill Road and School Street, extending from where the York Cumberland or Avesta housing is on the right. Now stands on the hill on both sides of the road, down 200 acres. Between the McLellans and the Finneys, they owned Fort Hill Road. When the family moved to the new land in the winter of 1738, they took with them a cow, a horse, and just a few household goods. When they first arrived in this wild and almost uninhabited land, they lived in a hunting camp located across the road from where the present house stands. Does everybody understand where that house is now? It's kind of on the corner of the university property. It's on the left-hand side of Fort Hill Road, School Street, I'm sorry. Going that way. It's like the end of the university property. They soon built themselves a log cabin just down the hill from the brick building. The story of their moving into the township of Gorham is as follows. Imagine moving in the middle of winter. Some of you have moved recently, I'm sure, or a long time ago. Imagine moving like this. They moved on an old white horse harnessed to a drag. A drag is 2 long poles The forward ends are confined to the horse like carriage shafts. The other ends are dragging some 20 feet behind. On these pieces they lashed cross pieces on which they secured all of their worldly effects. It was also a snowstorm that day. William, then 7 or 8 years old, and drove the cow. Hugh carried Abigail, the baby, that was 2 to 3 months old at the time, a part of the time, and drove the team while the mother carried the baby part of the time. They said it was a good kind of carriage where the track was good and straight, but bad over stumps and short turns. Can you imagine that woman rode on that thing with all her worldly goods? You know the wooded areas of Gorham, the whole area was just like that. They came from Portland, or Falmouth, by spotted trees, as there was then no road or track into Gorham from Portland. They said it was a long day on the road, and it was nearly dark when they arrived home. It was winter when this moving took place, and I understand there was a snowstorm that day. When they arrived at their house, they found that the building they were going to move into, was half full of snow. And they had to spread a coverlet and build a fire in the corner of the house for the two children to stand by until the room was cleared out and the roof repaired, and they did not get that completed till the next day. I had a very pleasant time moving into Gorham, but I think if that had been me, I'd have turned around and gone home. But anyway, they were fearful of losing their land after paying for it, as they had no more money. They did not get a deed until some time after they had put in a crop. There was only one other white family living in the area. Anybody know who? The Finney family that was living down Fort Hill Road, a couple of miles, quite a ways away. A few years later, the Indians became such a threat that following the massacre of their nearest neighbors, the Bryants, in April of 1746, the family, consisting of Hugh, Elizabeth, and 4 children at that time, moved into the fort at the top of the hill. They remained in the fort for 7 years during the remaining years of French and Indian wars. That, from what I've read, there is no picture or drawing of the fort, but in someone's way back in their memory, or they did outline in pencil sketch a picture of the fort. They have found some, they did an architectural search a few years back, and they did find some posts, but they don't know exactly. It was at the top of Fort Hill. They remained there for 7 years. Their daughter Jane was born there. I mean, I think I'd stop having kids if I had to have them on a boat coming from England and then in a fort with about 100 people. Well, no, there weren't that many then. After the wars, the Indian wars, they returned to their log cabin, and Hugh became a very successful farmer and lumberman. In fact, he became so wealthy that in 1763, he paid the highest tax in town and continued to do so for many years. I wonder if the taxes on that 200 acres of land were anywhere near as much as they're paying now on one lot. At the time of the Revolution, all their sons and son-in-laws, or sons-in-law, whatever, were in the army, and they contributed very generously to the effort. At a time when the families of Gorham, and there were approximately, I believe about 15 families here then, the families of Gorham's soldiers in the army were in great need because they weren't getting paid. The town was poor in resources because all the men were away fighting, and it was very difficult for the women to grow the food and feed their families, and money was very hard to raise. Hugh McLellan raised the funds to purchase a cargo, and I'm not sure what a cargo is, but a cargo of corn for distribution to the soldiers' families. It is said that no poor man ever went from his door without aid. And I have seen the receipts from some of these things. Hugh was a very generous man. It's true, he never turned anyone away. And his children were brought up the same way. Other families in town built themselves newer frame houses, but the McLellans still lived in the old log cabin. One Thanksgiving, when all the children, and they had 10 by then, gathered at the cabin with their children, grandchildren, must have been a little crowded, they decided that if there were any more grandchildren, the cabin would not hold them all. The children decided it was time for Mother and Father to have a new house. When Hugh was asked about a new house for them, he told them, "Your mother has always said, when we have talked about it, that as we both belonged to a race that had land and lived in stone houses, and as they turned her out for marrying a poor man, and now we have more land than any of them, she wanted a house made of brick." And thus was conceived the idea of what is now the oldest brick house in Maine and possibly in the country. The building began in 1770 and took 4 years to complete. All the work, including making the bricks, placing them, cutting down the trees for the wood, all the work was done by McLellans, and they did have a Negro slave at that time, Phillips. When Hugh was a boy, he had worked for a spell with his Uncle Robert in Ireland, who was a brickmaker, and therefore he had some experience working with bricks. First thing they did was set up their own sawmill to make their own boards from their own trees. They also hewed all the timbers needed and even made the shingles. Hugh built a kiln, and the clay from which the bricks were molded was dug over the hill from where the house stands. I believe this is toward the center of town, down in back of, if anybody knows any different, please correct me, because I've been trying to trace this on maps for years. I believe it's down in back of where Burger King
Mm-hmm.
and those areas are. They took some clay out of that area at one time. They dug the clay.
Allie Rinkunis
Yes.
actually dug clay there a couple of years ago and had a project
Right.
of using clay from
Okay,
that.
that's, I'm pretty sure that's where it was.
That's behind the parking lot or something.
Yeah, down a little further. There used to be a ski.
Mhm.
Yep. And I'm pretty sure, I can't swear to it, but I'm pretty sure that's where the clay came, that they took back to their house, and they made bricks. The family also used scrap wood, to fire the kiln and to temper the bricks. Water was lugged up the hill from Tommy's Brook. Now I know where that is, and I think most of you do too. It's the brook that runs across and divides School Street from Fort Hill Road. If you read the deed description, I think it must have moved a little because the water department building is right at the corner there, and they are stating a address of School Street. But everything I can find out, Tommy's Brook was the dividing, in fact, the deed to School Street, the selectmen voted on at one time, states Tommy's Brook is where it breaks off and it starts to be Fort Hill Road. So I think it's the same brook, but I do think it's probably moved. The only part of that house, from start to finish, that was not done by a McLellan was some of the mason work that was done by Jonathan Bryant. In return, however, he was paid very well by the McLellans with products off their farm. The masonry of the brickwork is interesting. You can see it in that picture a little. On the eastern and northern walls, which were planned to be the front of the house, there is Flemish work, which was painstakingly laid. Does anybody know what Flemish work is? It's a full brick in the end of a brick, a full brick in the end of a brick. And since those walls are 4 bricks deep, they must have spent most of that 4 years making bricks. But the Flemish work was just done on the 2 sides, while the southern and western walls were laid more simply in the long type of brickwork, as that type was less laborious, and these walls face the farms and the stables. All the walls in the house, all the outside walls, are 4 bricks thick, since in those days suitable insulation was very hard to come by. It is said that many of the bricks are marked by the builders, the McLellans. There is 1 brick on the east side that is supposed to be marked by the finger of Elizabeth with the date 1773. I searched for it and couldn't find it, but my eyesight isn't all that good, so. I already said that. On January 2nd, 1787, at the age of 77, Hugh McLellan died in the house he had built and is buried in the Old Village Cemetery. That's the cemetery down behind House of Pizza and whatever else is down there. Their stone, they are buried in the front left corner. Their stone has been replaced a couple times. There is a family that lives out west somewhere, and about every 10 years they come and they check out that stone. And the first time they came, it was almost completely destroyed. They had it duplicated and put in at their expense. His youngest son, Thomas, took over as head of the household. Elizabeth, a strong Gorham woman, remained a strong Gorham woman, and at the age of 90, there is a recording in a diary that she saddled her horse. There's a mounting block that's still there on the front lawn of this building. That's one of the things that the college saved. She used the mounting block, which was on the front lawn, got aboard her horse, rode 5 miles on the horse to her daughter's house to spin and weave all day, and then rode the 5 miles back.
At 90?
At age 90.
Good for her. She must have been in a
I suspect what I've read about Elizabeth, which he kind of took the front runner, but there's a lot written about her. She was a pretty feisty lady. I mean, when you're the first woman, not the first, but the second woman to live in Gorham, it's all trees, you've come through a snowstorm, riding on one of those, whatever you call them, I guess you got to be a little feisty. Well, they had 10 of them. On July 16th, 1804, at the age of 96, she passed away and was buried next to Hugh in the Old Village Cemetery. At the time of her death, she had 234 direct living descendants. Wow. Children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and great-great-grandchildren. It's no wonder they needed a new house for family gatherings. In 1803, Thomas McLellan, a direct descendant, gave the land from the old farm for the academy to get started. This building, the first building they built on this land, is at the top of the same hill as the McLellan house, about a 1/4 mile south. It sits up on the hill. It's called the Academy Building. And that was built in, well, very early 1800s. This Academy building, which is still located in the very same spot, was the beginning of what is now USM. The same institution which 161 years later was to buy the last 27 acres of the estate, which donated the land for its beginning. So they ended up with all of the land on that side of the street. For the land and the house, the college paid $20,000.
Wow.
The original lot was donated to them for free. $47,000 for other renovations. The school did preserve the mounting rock in the front yard, the original staircase, which they were nice enough to let me in. My husband and I got into an argument over what was supposed to be the front because of the brickwork. So we decided, before it got dark early one evening, we were going to go see. And I was right. He was wrong. But
Hey, Brenda.
I noticed there was somebody in the building. So I knocked on the door and nobody came to the door. So I opened the door and I went in and I hollered and helloed. And this very, very nice lady came. Her name was Shirley, I believe. And I explained what I was doing and could I come inside and look at it and maybe take some pictures. Oh, she was thrilled. So I don't think it's a particularly remarkable stairway, but this is the original one that was built in the original house back in the 1700s. What I did find interesting is one of the original windows is still there. It's on the second floor in the back. And I got a picture from the outside and from the inside. This is the one from the inside. There is one pane of glass, and I think it's either this one or this one, that's original. The rest is glass. You know how you can tell glass that came from 1700s? It's wavy. It really is the original glass in there, but that's only that one pane. And she let me take these pictures, and and like I said, the front steps I wanted no part of. The college, an interesting fact that I think is interesting about this house is from the time it was built in 1773 until the college bought it in 1965, it remained in the McLellan family. The last family owner was a Mrs. Vernon McLellan Gould, and she's the one that sold the last 27 acres. The college at one time renovated the interior of the house into student living for seniors at the college. I believe that lasted about a year. Obviously, female students, seniors, couldn't be trusted without a house mother. At the present time, the building contains offices on the first two floors, with the third floor being vacant. The college has no present plans for what will become of this building. I did try, and I tried hard, to get it for the Historical Society, but that didn't work out very well. This proud, handmade brick building still stands majestic and proud 240 years later in the same spot, on the same piece of land where it was built by the McLellan family, with all the makings of it built by hand by the McLellans. All the woodwork trees came from Gorham. And that's about the end of it. So now when you go by that house, you can appreciate it a little bit more.
Wow.
Okay?
Thank you.
Any questions? I'm not sure. You've heard this before, haven't you? Yes. Did I make any mistakes? Okay.